Hey people, I'm going to show y'all what the whore of Babylon is, and why all the kings bow down to worship, and why all the cool cookers want to kill her. The angels want to burn her in fire, and the Pope takes her out for drinks. And I'm not going to read a whole lot here because they don't have a clue. You know, everybody thinks Babylon is the city where the people try to build a tower to the heavens and shoot an arrow through God's heart. And that's a King James fairy tale. You won't find that anywhere else. And that's where they get this interpretation here from King James. It comes from Revelation 17. And they say that the whore is associated with the beast. You know, thereon, therein. The beast of Revelation, of connection with equally evil kingdom. The whore can also be translated metaphorically as the idolatress. You know, a whore, that's what your first wife calls your second wife. That would have been the second wife of Thought, and her mom was his first wife. Her name often translated as the seven-horned. She's attested from at least the first dynasty, and even before that, the same job title was taken under a different name. You know, and this is mapped it. This is mapped it. And that was their job of mapping. Often depicted wearing the skin of a cheetah and protected against the bites of snakes and scorpions. She was part of the pantheon of ancient Egypt deities that was prominent during the first dynasty of Egypt. She was prominent during the reign of Den. You know, this is the first one that had writings, and they found a lot of writings in his tomb to explain a lot about him. So he's one of the oldest pharaohs, and he wears the names. You know, the names is the powers. Once they got your names, they got your powers. And so everybody had powers in Egypt, wore the names on their head. And this name here is the hand, the D, and the waters, E-N, Den, where they get that from. And this here, this is the battle, and you see it the same as the Hebrew. You know, the base word is okum. You know, this is the H. You know, pronounced CH, divide. This is the MD, and then the EN. You know, come then. You know, the D is the TH, and that's a play on his name, Den. And come then, you know, and it'll come is the Hebrew for the battle, the war. You know, you keep pushing and it'll come. That day will come. And that's where that comes from. The come, this is the MD and EN, the come then. But it was the same God, the same job, and an evolved name because the writings were evolving to the new writing. But mapped it, defended Ra, map, M-A-P, mapped it, M-A-P-E-D-I-T, defended Ra from threats during his daily voyage. And so his daily voyage wasn't daily, it was nightly, his nightly voyage. And she would hunt by night, earning the epithet, the piercer of darkness, and ensure the coming of dawn. And so she mapped the stars, mapped it. That's coming from here, you know, they're reading this as a M-A, and the serpent is the F, which isn't the F, it's the Q. The Q, you know, could be pronounced as a P-H, a F, or a P-E, you know, and map, E-D, and mapped it. But she then evolved to Seshat, the consort of thought, and picked up more duties, goddess of writing, wisdom, knowledge. She's a scribe and record keeper. She was also credited with inventing writing. She became identified as the goddess of measurement, accounting, architecture, science, astronomy, mathematics, geometry, history, and surveying. She was variously depicted as the wife, daughter, or feminine counterpart of Thought. That would be his other name. You know, when she was with Thought, she was a whore. She was a whore of Babylon, and that would be his name, Daddy. You know, that's what the whore calls you. You're old enough to be her daddy. And she'll call you Daddy. But her job is stretching the cord, taking measurements, and plotting the land after the flood. She kept the pencil in her hand. She kept the records of goods, loot, captives brought to Egypt, especially through gang and military campaigns, conducting cattle census, closely associated with thought, the reckoner of time, god of writing. She shared overlapping functions, considered to be his sister, wife, or daughter. She invented writing and taught, thought, and thought taught writing to man. Her titles was the Lady of Builders. She did the layout, involved in planning and building and expansion of sacred sites and temples. She held various titles relating to writings and libraries, including Mistress of the Scribes, Lady of Books. She was the records keeper. She was the librarian. And that would be where the word Babylon come from. Revelation 17, the impurity of the sexual immorality, screwing your daddy of this, the one that does that, of this, of her. And upon the forehead of her name was written a mystery. Babylon the Great, O mother of the prostitutes and the abominations of the earth. And you can see where the word, the fornication comes from. And this was a mystery. People didn't quite understand how to read this. But this word Babylon, everybody thinks Babylon is the city from Genesis 11, where they had to go down and confuse the language because the people had one language and they would be able to do anything. So they scattered the people all over the earth, and they ceased building the city. And upon thus is called its name Babel, which is just a B-I-L, a bill. When you get a piece of ass and you get a bill with it, that's a whore. For there they confused, and this is B-L-L, so it would read as a B-L-I. And they say it means confused. And you see in the Greek the same place on account of this was called the name of the city, Confusion. It wasn't Babel. They say it's confusion, but it's not. This is a S-U-G or an S-U-N. And actually it's not, because this last word ended with that S, and this is a J-U-G. Of this jug chooses, the young chooses, because they're at the lay, a key here, at the lay, at that place. The lays of, the N followed by the E is now the bet, the B or the V. The lays of the chi. Chi is the Hebrew word, the Kunas word for woman, the mother of all life, chi. And she occurs. But if we look at this in the Latin, you can see the Babel here, you can make that out. And they'll say and call the name, the name and called. But this is a vocatum, this is a job. A vacate is to get out, and a vocate is that job. The job is the name, is the Babel. The QU, you can usually just replace it with a W. It's always a question, what, where, and when. Whereof a confusum is a labium, the universe of earth. A labium, the language, the labby, the books of the universal language of earth. And we hit this Google translator, and you see how they completely don't try to translate. And therefore was its name called. Therefore, anytime you see therefore, that means that's a misinterpreted word. Was its name called Babel because there the language of all earth was confused. The language of all earth. Everybody had the one language. Was confounded. Was confused. But yeah, that therefore, that's the word that they're replacing this vocatum, the job. The job of the librarian. And you'll find this written two different ways in a couple of Bibles. Sometimes it's a H here in these two places, and sometimes it's the O. But the Babylon, the Bible, Babel is language. Bible, sometimes they interpret Bible as scrolls, sometimes they interpret as books, having to do with language. In the Latin, when it says the Bible in the Greek, they'll put librum in the Latin, the library. That's what it has to do with, the language, the Babylon, the library of, and the G reading as an N here, same as an angel, the first G reads the N, and several other words, they change the G to the N, and the men all, and home, H-O-M-E, the men all home there. Which men are home at the library? The intelligent men. The men all home there. And they're ton of porn, and this isn't actually a cation, but it's a what in, the porn and what in delugemation. In deluge, you only find that in a couple places. The one in the Bible that say a deluge is a great flood, but nowhere else will it mean anything like that. Deluge is where delusion comes from, and that would be the Hebrew word for the great flood. You're delusional. In Hebrew it says, I will never destroy the earth again by flood, and the word is bullshit. You were out in the middle of the ocean and you thought the world was covered by water because you're delusional. In delugemation. This gist of this location. And so I talked about this in the past couple of movies, but if I was God and I was creating a paradise, I'm not going to put a man in there. I'm going to put me a cat in there. You got a Batman and a cat woman. A cat is not a man, a cat is a woman. And Y is in at has fuse them in, connect them together on there upon something walking up on two legs, a cat, and fused in a cat. The icon of committer on, and catch the likeness in, the homos in, and work, vav, key is a vav, a W, and the work it is on, and let them control, the work it is on to a niche do on, what their niche is, what's the niche of the cat? Fishing, and the work it is on to niche it on this. And phala catches me all the time because the L followed by the A reads as the N, and thou shalt not know, and it's a Adonis, and this Adonis says is Adonis is the woman. Dala and Donis, about the same meaning. It means of value, a teacher. A Donna, to educate, to shape, to create, to educate. Beauty. In the Middle Irish, they say it means therefore and then. That's the words they use when they're interpreting the Bible, when they don't want to interpret a word. So that tells me that the Old Irish probably had the correct word for it. But in the ancient language, it was the funder, the money, and that's where our dollar comes from. The fund, gift, alms, donation, generosity, money, value. wise, knowledgeable. With several of the Nordic languages, they call it a Dane. In Swedish, says it's to create, shape, educate. Adonis, experience or living through an event. But I like to think it's where our word dollars comes from, something of value, from the seas. That's where all the money was. You don't have to make a product. All you have to do is take something from somewhere it's in abundance and take it to a place where they need it. That's how the Greeks made all their money, in shipping. And the work it is on to niche, do on this, of the dollars says is. The H is reading between here. The dollar says is. What the money says. What on pedin on. What on pedin in. Pedin, what in the omega reads as a O or a E. And I believe it's a E without any markings on it. And impeding, in the way of, impeding into, a vor, the voron of. And that's where they're getting these winged creatures, because what you vor, what you're looking at, if you're looking at the heavens, the thing that's impeding you, the thing that's in the way, impeding, is whatever's flying up there, or the clouds, what's impeding to vor and of, the hour on of the heavens. And what in the kitchen in, that's the cat, always in the kitchen in, and faces this gist, looks in this direction. The Sphinx, is looking over there to the east, is looking at Leo. Upon, you be upon attentive, here pet into bear, fond of epithages. Epithages, what's written at the foot of the statue, where you stand. And so this kitchen inn, this is the base word. It comes from 6. You see it down here at the bottom on the 6th day, the KTH, the catch, and the pray comer, the catch, or comer is, AE is a ES, and comer is the catch. And if you look in the Septuagint, you'll see a lot of these parentheses here that just weren't in one of the Bibles, and you see that's missing the whole, the comer is part, and it's the pray catch. And that's what you were trying to catch, was the cat woman. You build a paradise, you get you a good job, you make a lot of money, you build a fine house and drive a fine car, and that's what you catch, the prey catch. And I put these side by side here in my paint while I was looking at them, and the cat icon, committeron, and here, opposite, I color code a little bit of this so you can see, but it's in Excel, the front half of a cat, a menu, a female cat. And this, the Vav, you see it here. Everywhere there's a key, it's across from a Vav. And that's why I learned just replace this with the Vav, a W, Y's in, and work it. WIR over here is the WAR over here, and what of, the ON, when the N's followed by the E, it's a B, the of, and you can see in the fish, the ON here starts with the B. And so Y's in it has a feesmin, the OI reads as a U, and this H reads as a E or a CH. This may be a fuxamin on thereupon cat, the icon committeron, and catch them, the OI reading as a U, and the O without the marking reads a E. And the catch homo is in, work it is on, to niche to on, this Donna says. And I'm not too sure, when I have a double consonant followed by a vowel, I put the vowel in between, and I'm not too sure if they see this H is a vowel or not. If not, the second S here reads the I, and it's the Donis, yes. And yes means Hebrew, it's the Hebrew word for love. Yeah, and she's yes, and got her yesing over there. Oh yes, oh yes. And the money, and yes, a prostitute. And what impeding, what's in the way into vorin of, what in the kitchen, and faces this gist upon tent of her pettin, to bear fond of, Fondov or EV, followed by the E. It's reading as the B. And fond of epithages, fond of the writings at the foot. And then the Hebrew here, it reads two different ways. And you see there's just these two words at the beginning that start with an A and no more. And then at the end, there's just two words that finish with a tack here, where the next word will read backwards and forwards. And so this reads two different ways. And I hate it because when it's like this, I'll get down and I'll forget by the time I get halfway through here whether I was reading it with the A words backwards or forwards. And I forget which way to read these next words. But and and thought about what's said. Said with thought behind it. And and all him knows had 'em. All him knows had 'em. In Excel menu. Could mutiny, the double vav here. The first one reads as an I. Could mutiny, could turn on you. A cat that you never know, they'll just turn. You pet them and they'll turn on you. And could mutiny where to. And budget, BDGT, budget, an ancient word, comes from old bag, and it means exactly that, budget, and where to budget. And that was the job of Sichet. She took care of the budget. She kept up with all the bills, counted the cows, and where to budget him. Above, UBOV, above, and pheasant. This is where the word pheasant comes from, FES, and an MIM is the same as that Egyptian letter N I was showing you. It represents the waters and is pronounced as an EN. And above pheasant, what's above and talking is the birds and the stars, and that was her job. She would hunt by night, earning the epithet, a piercer of darkness, and though Catwoman. She was a hunter, and Anubis, the old dog, he was just a messenger. Another word for angel. But Sichet, she took care of the counting, she took care of the budget and the astronomy. And so this must have been the Greeks that did this. They didn't like the animals being gods, so they switched it up and they put her in a cat. You can see the paws of the leopard here. You can see at the bottom the paws and the tail. And this is a good image. It's got Myers on it. They say that represents the stars. And here at the bottom it's got the cat feet and tail still on it. And this is the purr represents the house, and books, the house of books, the library. And this is NTR, and it's where the word enter comes from, to enter a library. And that's where this word shush comes from, the shush at, you're entering the library. And that was the male counterpart, the shusha. And where do budget him above pheasant, the stars. And by, a double B is the second one's a Y. And by Hema. Hema is the blood. And being that I read the A words head on, I'll read the words after this backwards and forwards now. And it's by them who, by the blood who in culture, CLXR in cultures, the AE reading is the ES, and by them who in cultures, EARX hears, and by them of in cultures hears, of calls them, CLSM, of calls them rear, RER, to raise, and measure, MSER, MSH, measure, must, and must all, and shares, hears. And her job was to go down after the flood and remeasure the shares. The shares are pieces of property that you're loaned to by the king, that the vassal is awarded by the king to take care of. And of calls them, the one with the say, Michael, he is like God, one that has the word. Of calls them rear, measures, must all shares, erts. And yammer, and all him knows had 'em, in Excel menu, could mutiny where to budget him, above Fessin, of in them who in cultures hears, of calls 'em rear, measure, must all shares, erts. And then you read again with the A words backwards, and you ignore these marks, and it becomes in yammers. The M looks like a S, and it reads the S when this word is read backwards. And then the L, is followed by the A now, so it becomes an N. And the IE becomes an A. And yammers on a nose. And then backwards, and made of Excel menu. Excellum new. It could mutiny where do budget him, above Fessin, of in them who in, of clears, CLEARTS, of clearance, of color, CLER, of color, measure, must alerts. A man, we look at something, it's either black or white or blue or red or green, but a woman, she knows all the millions of different colors in between. Above Fessin, of in 'em who in clearance, a cleric, the clerical, and over all the earth, of the clearance, of color measure, MSHER, of color measure, must alerts. And so this alerts, it's across from the epithages. What's written down at the foot of the statue, is your stance. And here fond of epithages or must alerts. I've seen this come up in my subscriptions, Zohar, Ancient History, under the Sphinx, the real Hall of Records, the library. And you'll notice it's under the left paw. And you'll see all around the world, they'll have these statues of cats, tigers, lions, and they have this little ball under the left paw. They'll have a globe under their paw. But that's what this is. This is power. It has the names on its head, the names meaning power, and it has the dino in the back. The rear end is the lion. It's the dino. It's the power. And the front end is the Excel. The power out front with the names. The names, and all stored in the library. And so Adam isn't a man. Adam is just a part of a word that goes with a hatum, and it's a hatum means mankind, and it's telling you which kind of man. And this is the kind of man that had a nose A nose had 'em. A nose had 'em in excellum new. Out front. And on that day it was the Forgem and ESIS. The Forgem Assist. That was somebody to assist, thought. And that was his sister, wife, daughter, the whore of Babylon, the librarian. And I'm going to cut this off here. Good day.